That should do it.
Great.
Good.
Thanks for the technical assistance. Appreciate it. So what we're talking about, we want to be very clear that today is all about THP plus. We've got a lot of THPs going on in California, and we have even more than ever. But we want to make it clear that today is not about the foster care extension for current dependents, young people who have an open dependency case. In the state budget, there was a policy adopted that allows young people to remain in foster care past their 21st birthday until June 30th, 2021. This conversation today is not about that. And the reason for that is the state is still, developing its policy guidance on that. And so we don't have information to share with you. When the state does, it will issue that. And if people would like us to, we could invite the state to come on and step through that. This is really about THP plus, which, as you can see from this slide, it's for former foster and out-of-home probation youth. So so their dependency case has been closed. This is the program that was in place before extended foster care. Young people can participate in the program for 24 months. To be eligible for the program, you have to have exited out-of-home care on or after your 18th birthday. And you also, a participation condition a requirement is working towards goals on a TILP. This is a question that Simone and I talked about yesterday. We often, we've gotten some questions, post-pandemic, which is a young person isn't working or isn't in school, are they still eligible for THP plus? There are not specific employment or education requirements in THP plus. The requirement is working towards the goals on TILP. So if the TILP is modified based on the realities of the pandemic or their individual circumstances, as long as they're working towards the goals on the TILP. So that's what we're really talking about is THP plus, a program we know and love, a program we're very fortunate in California to have, so that we can have young people get quality support through age 21, and then, if they so choose, and then a program still for young people who need that additional support. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, you see 27 counties opted into what we call SB 1252. And it was a bill that passed in 2015, which gave a little bit of extra wiggle room to young people in this program. So those 27 counties have opted into an extension that allows youth to participate up to 36 months and or up to age 25. So, so that's really the program we're talking about here, which is THP plus. It's a program that's been around for quite some time, and it's grown from being very, very small. The legislation that originally sponsored it was sponsored by California Youth Connection. So I think just to clarify, that's what we're talking about. Can you do the next slide, Simone? All right, so what was in the state budget related to THP plus? This was not kind of the headline of the state budget. I would say for foster care, the much bigger policy was, allowing young people to remain in foster care. But this was a companion piece to that proposal. And we've actually just copy and pasted the language that's in the budget right here on the slide. It simply says a county may, at its option, extend the services provided to former foster youth participating in THP plus as of January 1st, 2020, without regard to their age or length of time they receive services until June 30th, 2021. So it's a very straightforward language. And what it means is, just like we hit the pause button on youth exiting extended foster care, this policy gives counties the authorization to also hit the pause button on THP plus. So as you can see from the lower part of that slide, this extension runs simultaneously with the mandatory extension of the extended foster care program. So, we know young people can now remain in foster care until June 30th, 2021. And if a county so chooses to do so, young people may also remain in THP plus. Now, if we hadn't, you know, if we weren't extending extended foster care, we would have youth aging out and we would have a lot of demand for THP+. But the reality is young people are going to be authorized to remain in extended foster care. And so that regular demand for THP+ with youth, you know, aging out of care and then potentially needing another housing setting, that demand has been reduced because young people can remain in extended foster care. So I'm saying that because, you know, if I were maybe a provider or in a county, I might say, well, I don't know if we want to do this because what are those young people who are vulnerable and aging out? Well, the good news is they'll be able to remain in their placement. And so we want young people who need it to be able to remain in THP+. So let's talk a little bit more about this option. Next slide, please, Simone. So these are just some examples about, all right, so who are we talking about? So on the bottom part of the slide, we've listed those, what I called SB 1252 counties. And these are the counties that took the option that said, yeah, if a young person's participating in school, they can have an extra 12 months of THP+, or the program can go up to through age 25. So here are some examples of how to apply what we're calling the COVID-19 THP+ extension. That's kind of just our shorthand for it. If you are in one of these counties in the gray box, you may have young people who are reaching the end of their time period in THP+. Let's say they're going to turn 26, or let's say they've reached the 37th month of the program. You could keep them in THP+ until June 30th, 2021. Now you might think, wow, that's pretty old and that's a long time in the program. What we're really seeing a lot of is custodial parents. So you could have a young person who is 24 or 25 and who has is a custodial parent and who has a child or potentially even two. And so you can definitely imagine right now the challenges that young person faces. They may have lost their job and that young person's childcare may be closed. And so this policy gives you the flexibility locally to say, you know what, we're going to hit the pause button. We know this young person is turning 26 and they're reaching the end of their time, but it's really not in anyone's interest to have them exit their housing right now. We want to just hit that pause button. Let's let the economy return. Let's let the child care reopen. Let's let the schools reopen. So that's an example for one of the counties in the gray box. Let's say you're one of the counties that's not in the gray box. Your county didn't opt into SB 1252. Then you're in the original eligibility criteria. That's a young person who turned 25. They wouldn't be eligible anymore. But if your county took this option, you'd be able, again, to allow the young person to remain until June 30th, 2021, or a young person who reaches their 25th month. So again, a lot of these young people, from our annual report that we do each year, we've got a good idea of who is participating in THP+, and 20% of young people who are in THP+, have some form of stated disability. And about half of the young people of the young women are custodial parents. So we have young people with some real vulnerabilities who are participating in this program. And we think that's great because it's a great program doing great work. And so now with this policy, you have a tool in your toolbox to keep this available to young people. So let's go to the next slide, Simone. All right, so a little bit more information. So it went into effect July 1st, 2020. The Department of Social Services is issuing an all-county information notice. So we all know the state is doing so much right now. I mean, I don't know what you feel like, but I feel like I'm just reading ACLs every day. I mean, the level of policy development. This is, I don't want to say, I think this is maybe not at the top of their priority list because this is a county program. But nonetheless, they have stated that they will issue this ACIN to give guidance. But I guess what I would say is, please don't wait for it to exercise this policy. As you see in the bottom left-hand box, CDS is not requiring counties to opt in. So the ACIN is not going to require counties to email someone before they have this discretion. It's purely, that's why it's an ACIN and not an ACL. It's informational. The goal is to educate the counties that this is an option at your discretion. You can take this discretion now. And the real kicker is the policy is not accompanied by additional funding. So again, the best case scenario, we would have loved to see additional funding. The fact there's not additional funding is not as troubling because, again, young people are being authorized to remain in extended foster care. And so that demand is somewhat abated. But we are going to talk about some additional funding that is available that you can use for this purpose and other purposes next. But at the bottom of the slide, what you have is for additional guidance. We email the TAY policy unit all the time. I think sometimes when you get these generic emails, you think, does anyone really check those? Well, they absolutely do at CDSS. They email back all the time. It's a great team they have here. And so, yeah, as Simone's saying, they really do respond. And we all know that, it's best to get the policy directly from the public agency. So, sometimes a person might say, well, I was on this web seminar, but your public official may need to hear it directly from the state. And so if that's the case, don't be shy, give them an email, and they do a great job of responding in a really timely manner. So that's a little bit about the THP-PLUS extension. We're going to pivot now. I'm going to hand it over to Simone to talk about the funding that is the second piece of protecting transition age former foster youth during COVID-19.
Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to advance here, and before we move into the next discussion, we just want to kind of get a pulse here on whether counties have begun to implement the COVID-19 THP-PLUS extension. So we are going to just launch this quick poll before we move on. And if you don't know, that's fine. There's an option on there for not knowing. But we'd love to hear if you have that information, whether your county has opted in. So I've just launched the poll. Interesting. And I know it's, what are we in, late August now? Time flies. And so I understand some counties might kind of be in the process right now of figuring that out. I'll give it just another few seconds. And I think we'll count it down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So I'm going to share the results. So about, 1 in 5 counties has implemented. So 15 counties, it looks like, or I won't say 15 counties, 15 people on the call are from a county that implemented. It's like 28 people or 38% are from a county that has not implemented, and then 42% are unaware. And of course, this doesn't, this is very anecdotal. This is not data. We don't know which counties these are or if there's duplication, but we are going to be reaching out to counties and trying to get a sense of who does implement this extension. So we will hopefully have that data at some point, but thank you for sharing this. And I'm going to move on to our next kind of topic here. So Amy just talked about, Amy described it as kind of a tool in our toolbox to really, protect youth and help them stay stably housed, former foster youth and former probation youth during this public health crisis and really this kind of economic recession. And I think that's really what it is. It's our number one tool in regard to THP-PLUS over the next year. It's our number one tool to keep youth housed. But there are other tools that we can use kind of simultaneously or that we can use after, June 30th, 2021. And this kind of next tool that we're talking about is funding, and it could also help you implement this extension, but it can really be a great resource right now and after the extension is over. So if you joined us back in March for a web seminar, or maybe it was a Zoom call, we talked about this new funding that was in the 2019-20 state budget. So if you joined us, this will be some repetition of information, but it's been several months and feels like years. And we are in a different place now than we were in March. And when this $8 million when we were advocating for this to be in the budget initially to, try to expand THP-PLUS or to provide additional resources to THP-PLUS, we obviously didn't know that there was going to be a pandemic. But I think it's really, we're really thankful that this funding was put in the budget and that it's an additional tool or an additional resource during this time that is, challenging, to be modest. So $8 million was put in the budget in 1920, and the idea was that it was intended for THP-PLUS because of really realignment. It was not exactly put in the budget for THP-PLUS because THP-PLUS is a county administered program, but it was put in as the transitional housing program, and it does go to county child welfare agencies to assist young adults that are age 18 to 25 secure and maintain housing, and priority is given to young adults formerly in the state's foster care or probation system. So sounds very familiar, I'm sure. THP-PLUS serves former foster and probation youth. So the populations are really pretty aligned, and one of the big differences is who is administering this funding, which state agency. This is not the Department of Social Services that's actually administering it, but the Department of Housing and Community Development. Kind of back when we were advocating for this funding, it was originally a bill, AB 995, that Assemblymember Phil Ting was authoring, and it ended up, we ended up getting it done in the budget. So it ended up in the budget trailer bill, SB 80, and that's, how this funding came about. So administered by HCD, the funding's allocated to child welfare agencies, and where we are now, that's a little different than where we were before. So $8 million was included in the 1920 state budget. Then we have another $8 million in the current fiscal year budget, the 2020-21 budget. And then there will be an additional $4 million in the 2021-22 budget. And why that is because the program is set to suspend on December 31st, 2021. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. But I want to say that, the language that states that it's subject to this suspension, of course, when we were advocating for the funding, again, didn't know there was going to be a pandemic. The language said if state general fund expenditures exceed revenue, that it would not, that it would suspend. But we, didn't know that would necessarily happen. Now we're here. We are in a multi-billion-dollar deficit, and it is subject to suspension. So we are going to be advocating for that to not happen. And we'll talk a little later about how we can get your help to do that. But I'll just say that, we are looking at still $20 million going down to counties that can be used on THP-PLUS over the course of, the 3 years that we're getting this funding. So that's very encouraging. So these are the allocation amounts. In 2019-20, these were the allocation amounts that counties could accept. These were all the counties that were allocated funding. The red counties are the counties that did not accept their funding. So, and I also want to back up because I don't want people to be alarmed and say, what, funding, we didn't get our funding yet. There was a very delayed process in the fiscal last year's kind of allocation of the funds. It didn't roll out how you would expect where, okay, it was last year's funding, we should have got it last year. It rolled out very late in the year. And as many of you know, your county accepted it in the spring, and there's still, from what we understand, currently disbursements, from what I understand, are going out for last fiscal year. And they've, released now the round 2 for the current fiscal year's allocation acceptance materials. So don't be alarmed if you're wondering, why didn't we have this funding last fiscal year? But this is who, in the black accepted their funds from last year. In the red, those are the counties that did not accept. You can see that those are the counties that either, don't have THP-PLUS programs, or the funding, the allocation amount is very small. So there's no large counties with large numbers of foster youth and that received a very, very large allocation that didn't accept this funding, which is good. And then just to also clarify, 2 counties didn't get an allocation. So you don't see Alpine or Sierra on here, and it's because they didn't have any kind of eligible youth according to the allocation methodology. So like I was mentioning, we understand that the standard agreements kind of were in the process of being executed very recently, and that disbursements were set to go out. We're wondering if any counties, particularly I think if you're from a county child welfare agency or you're a provider, you may know whether your county has received its 1920 funding allocation. So I'm going to launch, I believe is our last poll, and just get an idea here if people have received their 1920 funds. So again, if you don't know, no worries, just an informal kind of temperature check. So far it's looking like, it doesn't really look like maybe maybe one county has received it. But this is helpful to know, because then we can also check back in with HCD and get an idea of timeline of when the funds will be dispersed. Because from what I understand, it is very, very near, if not now. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Thanks, everybody. So as you can see, most people are unaware, which is understandable. There's probably not a lot of people on the call that are from their fiscal department, I'm guessing. And that might be where that information is. So let's move out of these polls and continue on. So, and I just also want to say, and I think Amy said this in the beginning, we will stop and do a discussion, question and answer shortly. So, I see there's questions coming in, and we'll get to those. So let's talk a little bit about eligible uses. And, I think kind of the headline here is, this is very flexible funding that you can use for THP-PLUS. The language is, funds shall be used to help young adults who are 18 to 25 years of age secure and maintain housing. Use of funds may include, but are not limited to. So you see on the screen, it's assisting, identifying and assisting housing services for this population. It's securing and maintaining housing. Again, mention a priority to former foster and probation youth. And then this third line here, AB 995, the legislation we had originally worked on that would have created this, originally had a provision that really had intent to create sort of a bridge between the homeless response system and THP-PLUS and child welfare. And so that intent, I think, kind of showed up here a little bit, and that's the improved coordination of services and linkages to community resources within the child welfare system and the homeless continuum of care. And then lastly, provide engagement and outreach and targeting to serve those with the most severe needs. So this is very broad language. I mean, at the end of the day, you can absolutely use this for THP-PLUS. The idea is assisting that population with stable housing at the end of the day. Okay, so reporting requirements. So again, the reporting requirements are very loose. This is what they're asking for. So it is not, when you accept this funding, and particularly for counties who do have very small allocations, I know there's discussion of, if we accept this very small allocation, is, how much reporting, kind of weighing the time and money that it takes to maybe accept the allocation, administer the funds, weighing against what work we have to put into report. Very little. You can see there's just 4 very simple questions there that the state is asking for, and reports are due annually for the 3 years following the distribution of funding. So we want to talk also a little bit about, how, again, we said the funding is fairly flexible as far as how you use it. What are some ideas for how you could use it for THP Plus? And I apologize if you're hearing some noise in the background. Like Amy, I have some kids here in the house, and they're a little bit excited, it sounds like. But the first thing, and what we kind of alluded to at the beginning of the call, was implement the COVID THP Plus extension. So like Amy mentioned, we're not looking at further impact in the THP Plus program because it's rolling out simultaneously with this extended foster care extension. But you might be in a county that already has an impacted THP Plus program where there's already waiting lists. And this could help you, even allow more youth to remain in the program or expand your existing bed capacity. But so you could use this funding to implement the COVID-19 THP Plus extension. You could simply use it to increase bed capacity. And of course, it depends on your allocation size as to what is realistic and how much housing costs in your county and all these factors. So you should really be figuring out what makes sense for your county and the youth that you serve. But these are just some ideas. You could expand eligibility to youth who were in foster care, that didn't make it up to all the way to age 18 in foster care. Some youth age or exit the system at 16, 17. They almost make it to that 18 marker, but maybe they enter a guardianship, or they enter adoption, or they reunify with their parents, which is the most common scenario. And that doesn't always mean that they're going to be stably housed once they turn 18 or once they turn 21. So we know that we hope that those are successful exits, and we hope that their permanency plan is fully intact, but we know that's not always the case. And so if we were to, if you wanted to use this funding in your county to broaden the population a bit, you could, because the THP language you saw earlier is priority given to former foster and probation youth. There's no requirement that they're in care at age 18. So you could, for example, set the marker at 16 to align it with, ILP eligibility and other kind of college campus-based programs. You could increase the monthly rate per youth to address higher housing costs or enhance services. We know that California, before the pandemic, was in a housing crisis. That has not changed. And it costs a certain amount of money to rent apartments for these young people that are safe, that are healthy environments, that are located in the right place, and then provide all of the very, very key supportive services that make THP Plus what it is, and that really makes supportive housing supportive. So, a good rate is a very important ingredient to a good THP Plus program, because we have to, equip the program provider with the tools to deliver a high quality program. You could establish a parenting rate to account for higher cost of housing and services. We know that youth who are parenting require more kind of support and services, and also require different living accommodations often. So providers, for the most part, will look to try to put a parenting youth in a 1-bedroom apartment versus a shared 2-bedroom. The truth of the matter is, renting a 1-bedroom apartment is more expensive than renting half of a 2-bedroom. So serving a parenting youth is more costly, and we definitely want to make sure that parenting youth have access to this program, and that they are being served, and that we're equipping programs with the tools to serve them. For counties with smaller allocations, I know some of these things above aren't necessarily an option, and so you can get creative and think, what can you do kind of within the program? You could increase just, the youth stipend portion of what's going out monthly. You could add a financial incentive for students, like a deeper rental subsidy. You could enhance housing navigation services for youth transitioning out of the program, or other things that maybe you've always said, wow, we really wish we could do this. We just don't have it in our budget. We just need a little more to do it. And I really encourage, counties and providers to get together and talk about what those things are. If you have a smaller, allocation, I'm sure there's a good use for those funds. So timeline for distribution, when we talked in March, there was a March 31st deadline for the round 1 allocation acceptance form and the other materials that go with it. That deadline, if you recall, was extended to April. As you saw, almost all counties got their materials in, which is great. And then in July, HCD began issuing kind of the round one funding to county agencies, and that meant awarding them and executing these standard agreements, and then will ultimately result in the actual disbursement of funds, which we understand should be very soon. On July 27th, HCD announced round two funding for the current fiscal year, also the $8 million. The allocation amounts are the same as last year, and they did that so that they could get it out as quickly as possible, understanding that we are in a pandemic and a crisis. And county child welfare agencies have till November 12th, 2020 to accept their funding allocation. And that's, again, going to be that allocation acceptance form, a government TIN form, and a board resolution. And sorry, that shouldn't be plural. That's just, they just need a board resolution. And I think we clarified this in the next slide, but I'll say it again here. Unfortunately, it cannot be the same resolution that you use to accept last year's funding. I mean, you could use the same language, but it has to be a new resolution. So get that on the agenda for the next meeting if you haven't already. And then February 2021 is the date by which HCD expects to have dispersed the round two allocation. And then what's not on here is kind of the following. Like I mentioned, there's a $4 million allocation, which is proposed to be the final allocation for the next fiscal year. And we're hoping to, to not make it the final allocation and to see this program continue, but that's to be continued. And the allocation acceptance materials all go to HCD, and HCD sent all of those to the county kind of contact person that they established during round one. So hopefully counties have that information. But what's on the next slide is where you can reach out to if you are like, what are you talking about? We didn't get the email. I don't know what you're talking about. First go back to your county, make sure that someone else there doesn't already have this information, isn't aware, but ultimately please reach out to HCD. They have a specific email address set up for these questions, and it's thp@hcd.ca.gov. And I can put that in the chat for people so that you have it. But that's where to send questions to about this program. They've also set up a website in the gray box for just about THP, about this funding, this $8 million. The allocation acceptance materials are there, and anything else that they post would be posted there. And then we've set up our own implementation page on our website, which and I'll just put that I'll put both of those in the chat as well. Oh, Amy's doing it. Thanks, Amy. But this web page has the allocation acceptance, it has the forms as well for accepting the funding, but it also has the allocation amounts that you saw on the screen. It has who accepted funding the first round, what the amounts are for the next year. It has a recording of our webinar from March. It has a lot of information there, so check that out. And also feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. We're happy to answer those. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, but for the immediate next steps, find this money locally. If you're a county, ensure key personnel are aware of the deadline. So that November deadline, we want to make sure that no one misses that. And again, it could have gone to a fiscal person. It's whoever that point person was that Stephanie at HCD connected with when the round one materials were sent to HCD. And so hopefully that's the right person in your county, but please reach out to HCD if you don't think anyone in your county that this is on their radar. Contact your board of supervisors, get the resolution, and again, that shouldn't be plural. I think we cut and paste from our March webinar when we were talking about two different programs, but get the resolution on the next agenda. And again, just to reiterate, you can't rely on that resolution from round one. You've got to get a new one for this round two funding and get your documents in by November 12th. Lastly, I mentioned earlier that we'd be reaching out to counties to learn whether you're implementing the THP-PLUS extension. In that same reach out, we are going to also ask how you're using these funds. We really, really want to know. And part of that is if we are going to make the case for continued funding, we need to know more about how they're being used, and we need to be able to communicate that. And so we'll put together it'll be a short survey, and we'll send it out to county child welfare agencies. And we really hope that you can respond and get that information to us. And that'll be making its way to you kind of in the coming weeks. And if you're a THP-PLUS provider, particularly if you don't think anyone from your county agency is on this call, notify your county agency about the application deadline. Make sure it's on their radar. Hopefully it is, but it doesn't hurt to just kind of double check. You know, the round two funding went out, right? To make sure that someone's following up on that. And then discuss with your county partners, you know, how your county's allocation can be utilized and how you two can partner on supporting youth during the pandemic, really. All right. So again, I said this earlier, the funding is currently scheduled to end December 31st, 2021. We know that that's not because the money is not needed, or it's not because all former foster youth and former probation youth are stably housed, but it's because we're in a budget deficit. And we need to communicate that, you know, this population is vulnerable and is, you know, really deserves we need this funding to continue so that we can continue to invest in this population and help youth, you know, remain stably housed and transition to really, you know, stable, independent adulthood, which is we are now in a more difficult place than we were when the funding was first put in the budget. So we really need to get that information from you and make the case for sustaining the funding in the 21-22 budget. And, you know, we have on the screen here, it will be critical yet difficult. And that's why we're really asking for your help. We need to show how important of a role this funding is playing in protecting youth. And so we have a link at the bottom of the screen that I think Amy will paste or I can paste this. I don't know if, Amy, you probably don't have that direct link. I can paste it so you don't have to try to somehow copy it from the from the PowerPoint. So there that is. But please, that's all it asks for is, I think, your name, your email, your phone number, your organization. Just basically, we will put you on a list, and when it comes time to ask for support to protect this funding, we will reach out to you about that. So please join this coalition to protect the $8 million, and we'll work together to make that happen. And then, you know, we mentioned kind of these tools in your toolbox. The THP-PLUS extension, excuse me, the COVID-19 THP-PLUS extension is that #1 tool. We really hope all counties, you know, implement that extension. But, you know, like I said before, there's things that need to happen once that extension ends, and there's things that need to also happen over the next year, you know, simultaneously with that extension to support young people. So we do have a guide that we updated with this that has information about the extension in it now. It also talks about the transitional housing program funding, and we've updated it just this past few days to include that new information. So check that out. It has information about other funding sources and vouchers and other ways you can really ensure housing stability and support former foster youth during the pandemic. So as someone just said, can you send these links as an email to everyone? Oh yeah, and Amy's responding. Absolutely. We'll follow up and make sure that everyone has them in an email body, and I'll just type that last one in there. So I think we're going to move on to question and answer now. I think I'm going to mute myself and have Amy moderate that.
Well, I think one thing I want to say is we realized we were deciding, should this be a Zoom meeting or should it be a web seminar? And I just found out in my email box that we picked the wrong one, because evidently Zoom meetings have a max of 100 people, or at least our account does. So we had about 180 people register for this. So I guess I'm sharing that with you because your colleagues, if you're a county representative, maybe your contracted providers or others weren't able to participate. We will record this, we'll send it out to all registrants, but our apologies, we didn't know there was that maximum. And so lots of people are emailing in, letting me know they weren't able to enter. We'll change that in the future, but do please be liberal with your sharing of this information. I feel like we're in a fog almost. It's so hard to penetrate all of the information we're getting. And so I feel like everyone's very much trying their best, but particularly for a very small program like this. I mean, you guys might be thinking $8 million, what's that? But the reality is it's the $8 million we have. And so it's the $8 million we want to use and the $8 million we want to protect. So don't, just reach out to people so that they find that money, we get that money and we get it out used to young people. I think I was shocked when I moved from a direct service capacity into more public policy at how much unspent money there is at the state level. And it's really not because anyone doesn't care, but it's often just these tiny little buckets of money that don't get fully expended because it takes a lot of money to reach out and have them make their way all the way into the many, geographically diverse communities we have in California. And so this conversation is an attempt to be that connective tissue, to find that money, to get it out through your THP programs to be in service to young people. I think the best case scenario is that we will use every last penny of it, and then we'll be able to go back to the legislature, explain the value that it's brought to the state of California and the quality of life it's brought to young people. And they'll say, absolutely, why wouldn't we keep this going? Dare I say, maybe we could even increase it. So there haven't been a lot of questions, some comments that I think are very good. Several people mentioned the fires, but this is a very flexible use of money. If young people in your county are experiencing displacement due to fires, that's a great example of how this could be a complementary funding that could couple with your program to be used to support them during this time. I know yesterday I had a long conversation with a student from UC Santa Cruz who now is adrift and has a little savings, but is also not far away from being in some serious trouble. And so a very nice flexible source of funding like this is something that we can deploy at this time. While we're here and while we have this nice collection of people too, another very valuable resource is for those of you who are serving young people who are either heading to college or who are in college, is a response fund that John Burton Advocates for Youth has established together with Together We Rise. And it's helped over 400 young people, providing over $300,000. There is still money available though. So Simone, if you want to share the link to that, many of you who have already applied to be a referring organization, but if you haven't and you have young people who are impacted by the fires or otherwise, that is also another highly flexible source of funding that we want to see get out to young people. Well, here's a question I'll pose, and I'm going to pose it for you, Simone. Any ideas or suggestions for counties that don't have a THP-PLUS program in using the allocation? So we know there are a handful of those programs that don't. Most counties do. I think it's 48 do, but it sounds like we have someone from one of those 11 counties that does not have a program.
Yeah, I think that I'm not guessing, I know that if you don't have a THP-PLUS program, you don't have a large number of foster youth or former foster youth in your county. And so I think what a good strategy could be is working with your, within your county child welfare agency to assist those youth on an individual basis. I don't think you have to establish a full-blown program. You can provide, if they need a security deposit, that can be a good use of these funds. If they need assistance with furnishings, that could be a good use of funds. It can be a flexible way to support youth in becoming stably housed. You could, you know, help with moving costs. I think there's a lot of ways to help youth become stably housed when you don't have, you know, 300 youth you're dealing with. If it's 3 youth or it's 2 youth or it's 1 youth, you can be very flexible and do things on an individual basis, and it doesn't have to be a full-blown program.
I think another question, really good one, is could counties use the funds to just add beds to current contracts? I think that is a perfect use of it. They're raising a good point in that question as well, but this funding, we have $8 million from 1920 that is just coming out. We have another $8 million from 2021, and we have at least another $4 million. So, you know, while the funding at this juncture legally has a stop date of December 2021, which we're all going to work together hopefully to change, you do have a pretty decent kind of roadmap in terms of knowing what your allocation is, knowing how much you're going to get through that time. And so I think partnering with your provider to kind of sequence that so that you are in conversation and not permanently necessarily increasing that contract, but, you know, perhaps having a supplement to the contract where you increase it for a period of time. Another one's the clarification. If your county did not previously opt into the TSP-PLUS extension, we still have the flexibility, yes. So if your county didn't opt into that 1252 provision, that has no bearing on this. They're completely independent. Another quick question, have there been counties that have not spent all of their allocations? So this is a very important thing for everyone to be mindful of, is this is a realigned program. And this program was realigned in 2011, and every county has an allocation. But again, counties are big, complex things where hundreds of millions of dollars of benefits run through these programs. Every person should know what their THP-PLUS allocation is, and you should be in regular communication about if it's getting fully spent down. This kind of smaller program can almost get lost in the mix. We see programs underspending THP-PLUS all the time. And to answer the question, what happens, it just sits in the county. It doesn't get redistributed to other counties who need it. It is a realigned program. So we are happy to redistribute what the THP-PLUS allocation is when the program was realigned, but that's a very critical number to know, because we want to make sure every dime of that money goes to this program, unless there's a policy decision made for it not to. Now, if there's a policy decision made locally for it not to be, that's a whole different question. But if it just isn't getting spent because it's not being tracked closely, then that would be very unfortunate, to say the least. So here's another one for you, Simone. I'm talking plenty. Does this funding also benefit youth in THP NMD?
This funding is it's flexible, but it is intended to be for former foster youth. That is the priority population. But I will say that we did get some funding in this current year's budget that will benefit THP NMD, but there is an implementation timeline, so it's not going to be immediately implemented, and that is the THP NMD housing supplement. And you can follow up with me if you want more information on that, but that is separate. This funding is intended for former foster and probation youth, or for THP-PLUS, but it is flexible, so you do have some leeway there.
Thank you. Next question, is it likely that youth who exited THP-PLUS July 1st and whatever time a county would officially opt in could re-enter? I'd say yes. I mean, the law is clear. If they were in care as of July 1st, it doesn't say and hadn't exited. So the intention is really, again, to press that pause button to protect young people during the pandemic. I also just want to clarify that the county does not need to officially opt in. That the state is not requiring that. I think they have more than enough on their plate. They're going to be informing counties of this, and then you can go forth. There's no money that comes with this. It is a realigned program. And so This is something every county has the discretion now to proceed with. And I know that people very much prefer having that state guidance, and so we're delighted that they're going to issue that, but they're not going to be, as we understand it, asking people to circle back and indicate that, and they're not going to be tracking it. It is a temporary policy. It's only till June 30th, 2021, and so understandably, I think they have to decide how much administration they can really dedicate to this. Another one is, can you tell us which counties are not spending their full allocation? Well, a great way to get that information, and we can circulate this, is annually there is a realignment report. We're not always clear that it is the most accurate, but it is what we have, and it is a report that is done annually that provides information about how much of the THP-PLUS program is spent. And so a few more questions, and then we'll kind of probably wrap it up. Our county's experiencing a waiting list because of the AB 12 detention, and there's not as much concern currently as you staying in care. However, we will have a large number edging that extension and not enough spots or funding next year. I mean, I think you're raising a really good point, is there's really not enough all the way around. And so no one is in a better position than your counties and your providers to have that conversation. How do you want to organize this? But certainly what we need more than anything, and we hear this every day, is we need the issuance of the ACL on the extended foster care extension. We know many counties are reticent about really following through with that until they get that ACL, even though it is in the law. So that's something we'll keep asking for, and I know it's something they're working very hard on right now. So I think that that might be where we're at. We're right at 10:30. We will send a copy of the PowerPoint, and we'll also send a recording. And I know they're not on the meeting, but again, my apologies for those who weren't able to enter. You'll be hearing from us soon. And thank you for everyone who has completed the survey for THP-PLUS. So without further ado, I think that concludes our meeting today. Simone, any last comments you'd like to make before we wrap up?
No, just to echo your appreciation for joining us, and we'll be in touch. All right. Have a great rest of the week.